let me first begin, since I have a nice captive audience of many friends and some students and others here, by saying that you are attending a lecture that is under the moniker of our Bennett Schmidt lectures for the higher aim of art. So these have been really important lectures and presentations to us because they entail what one would do with the skills that are so hard won, that are so hard fought. Where do you take those skills? What's important to make images of today? And that's what these have been all about. We've been thrilled to have them. I'm extremely privileged because I've been at every single one of these talks, so I'm happy to bring them to you. And we have two more on the docket until we close out the Bennett Schmidt lectures for 2020 to 2021. The next one that we have coming up is going to be a talk with another noted author named Samuel Adequay. Sam is a really great painter, a super nice guy. He was a teacher at the National Academy of Design way back in the day, taught all over the place, was a teacher of Colleen Berry. Sam is just a terrific guy. So Sam is going to come and speak for the Higher Aim lectures here on Wednesday, April the 21st at 6 p.m. And what I should do is put the link in the chat box. I'll do that in a minute. Let me not lose my place. I just want to say Samuel Adequay's uniqueness in turning nature into people and into beautiful timeless paintings that inspire future generations is what he does. Sam Adequay is not only an artist, but also the author of Origin and Inspiration, a Strand Books #1 bestseller 3 years in a row, and one of the best books on the table. Origin of Inspiration, a treatise on the best way to live for a creative life, is full of ideas, according to Rolling Stone magazine. So please join us on that day, April 21st, Wednesday, for Sam Adequay. The last event that we will have for Studio Incamminati for the Bennett Schmidt lectures on the higher aim of art will be a panel discussion, which we've never done. We're really excited about it. It's going to be called The Artist's Life, Work, Ambition, Perseverance, Determination. And so the focus of that discussion is going to be the emergence from study into professional practice, some of the hardest things to get past for artists. And it's kind of a rite of passage in many respects, as we know. But we wanted to talk to some very successful painters and some people that are, involved in our community, but a little bit outside of our community at the same time about their experiences anecdotally and whatnot. So we are going to include on the panel Will Cotton. And you may know Will's work. He's painted Katy Perry. He's sort of, just an incredibly gifted painter. And a figure painter at that. Alex Kanefsky, who is a noted Philadelphia painter. Many people know Alex's work. Alex's wife, Hollis Heichheimer, Mary Jane Ansell from England, and the panel will be moderated by Alyssa Monks. She'll be our moderator that night. So that is going to happen on Wednesday, May the 19th at 6 p.m. Again, the artist's life, work, ambition, perseverance, determination. So please join us for that. It's free to the public. Just go to our page, the Incamminati website, and look for the events, the Higher Aim of Art, Bennett Schmidt lectures, and you can sign up there. Other than that, we've got some educational projects that we're working on for July, so please stay tuned. Some of those will be in person, some of those will be virtual, but we're working on something that we feel is going to be more robust. So again, stay tuned for that. We also, as a final event, to mention before we get going with Roberto, we have the Rising Voices exhibition, which is an exhibition of the 10 finalists for the first ever Bennett Prize exhibition. So that is looking amazing. It's in the hallways. We just hung it yesterday. We're going to light it in the next couple of days. And so let us know if you want to come by for the opening. The opening is semi-private because we want to figure out the social distancing factor. So again, reach out to us if you want to come to town for the opening next week. All right, so that out of the way, I want to welcome Roberto Osti, who's been a great friend of mine for many years and a colleague, and a long time ago a student, right?
Yes, back in before the World War II, right?
Am I that old? Okay, Roberto, he is a storied and celebrated career. His education includes, of course, the New York Academy of Art, where he achieved his master's. He earned his master's as a cum laude graduate in 2007. He was awarded merit scholarships, which involved working with noted British painter Jenny Saville. He also worked at the Art Students League with Lisa Specht and Barbara Adrian from 96 to 2001. He worked in his education at Bologna University in Italy, where he studied in the School for Anatomical and Surgical Drawing and graduated with honors in 1982. And also studied at the State Institute of Art in Bologna in the 1970s. As a teacher, he's taught all over the place. He's taught at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, where he's been a master artist lecturer in figure anatomy from the fall of 2006 to the present day. He's been at Drew University, the Casperson Graduate School, Madison, New Jersey, from 2002 to the present. He's lectured on medical and scientific illustration, the sublime body and the rational body, mystical images, Renaissance and anti-Renaissance, the botany of healing. He is taught at Bloomfield College. He's taught at Yale and the Montclair Museum. And it's earned him so many accolades that he's actually become a celebrated author as well. So he's published a legendary book by this time on figure anatomy. He's also been involved in other publications with the Natural History Museum, Scientific American Magazine, Scientific American Mind, Scholastic Books, Prentice Hall, the Oxford University Press, Rizzoli Publishing, Focus Magazine. It goes on, and we are extremely happy that he is debuting for us this evening a presentation related to his latest book, which is Dynamic Human Anatomy. I myself am also very excited because I contributed to the book in the form of imagery, and I wrote the foreword. And I am certainly honored to have been asked, and even more delighted to present to you Roberto Osti tonight. And so I'll give it to you, hand it over to you, and take it away, please, Roberto.
Hi, guys. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for showing up in droves. There's so many people tonight, and it's really nice and heartwarming to see that in this difficult moment between COVID and segregation, etc., so many people now are devoting themselves to the arts, one form and another form, right? Anatomy, arts, painting, writing. So many people are trying to resist this dark moment by tapping into deep into their creative juices, like the essence of us all. Art does that to us, right? So art permits to look inside us and find things that are beyond this grim reality, maybe propose something new, right? react in a very elegant and aesthetic way to difficult times. I would like to start this presentation tonight by showing a few images of Bologna, my hometown, because as you might know, in the Incamminati, Studio Incamminati, takes the name from a studio that the brothers and cousin Carracci named their school, the academy, in it was 1582. And at first this academy was called Accademia dei Desiderosi. Desiderosi means somebody that has desire in a very deep sense, desire to achieve, desire to get good, desire to become famous. And eventually, from Desiderosi, it became Incamminati. Incamminati is another very interesting word because it means literally on the path toward, right? Cammino means to walk. Incamminati, somebody who is on the path towards something. And of course, it's a metaphorical path, right? But the path is toward a voyage of discovery, a voyage of where you challenge yourself. You challenge yourself intellectually, academically, and try to achieve a higher level, right? Intellectual level and artistic level, etc. So these two brothers, at the age of 22, they started this academia. And I would like to show you some images of Bologna. Here you go. And I would like to start with this little premise, right, about the Carracci, where I paired anatomy and compassion. Compassion is just not all, but I think that compassion is a good word for describing Carracci approach to the study of anatomy, because it included not just the physical aspect of humanity, let's say, but also the psychological or more the more life. It was about life connected with the anatomy, meaning a connection between the physical and the spiritual. The Carracci were also considered to be one of a group that were promoting or kind of anticipating the Baroque period. So let's see now. This is Via dei Falegnami, and this is in Bologna, my hometown. I've seen it many times walking around the city. And Via dei Falegnami is where the studio was. And this is on the right, Via dei Falegnami, very narrow. And on the left is a narrow vehicle, the narrow road that stems from Via dei Falegnami. And as you can see, Bologna is medieval city originally. Actually, it's Roman, but the medieval roots are still very visible in Bologna. And next, very close to where the studio of the Carracci was, there is this sculpture group by Niccolò dell'Arca, and it's about the compassion for compianto of the dead Christ. This you can still see these today in this little church in Bologna, and they are quite stunning. They're quite stunning. It's a group that is not very well known, but the Carracci, they must have seen this because it was just 100 feet from their school, their place. And Michelangelo seen this when he was running away from the Pope in Bologna. And in fact, they pick up the tradition of the Carracci pick up the tradition of the Compianto del Cristo Morto, which is in occasion of the Good Friday festivities. This sculptural group was shown in occasion of the Good Friday festivities, and we can see the approach that Carracci had toward anatomy. Imagine now the anatomy. Actually, I'm going to show it to you. This is the anatomy of Mantegna, about 100 years earlier. When we see early Renaissance, we see the anatomy, and we see perspective depicting the Christ, the dead Christ, but what is missing is the dramatic contortion of death that we see 100 years later, after the dictation of the Council of Trento, to how to depict the body, or how to depict the saint, how to use anatomy. And we can get into that later on. This is, for example, another example how to that we can compare the painting of Annibale Carracci, this is about 1580, and the one of Mantegna on the right is 1480. So what changed? So we see on the right, the Mantegna Christ is depicted according to the rules of mathematics, the rules of anatomy, and the body of Christ, even if it is, of course, dead, right? It is not. You don't feel like he is dead. His form are ruled by mathematics, are ruled by perspective. On the left-hand side, we see a Nibali perspective on the same scene. And instead, death in here is present. But it's not a gruesome death, a scary death. It is, yes, Christ is dead, but what Nibali was trying to elicit in this work is compassion more than a sense of horror. We see also how these works eventually had kept inspiring artists in centuries to follow. So anatomy, as we can see, is at the core of all this painting we have seen so far. But you can see how it can be used differently to depict the human body. You can charge the human body with different meanings based on the cultural, religious interest of the specific period. During the early Renaissance, the body of Mantegna, the Christ of the Mantegna's Christ, shows that even in death, the human figure is quite amazing. It's amazing because it is measurable, it is known. This is a period where artists were studying anatomy, rediscovering the human body in reaction to the horrors of the Black Death of the Middle Ages, when the cadavers were shown in various stages of decomposition, and it was death that was at the center of the artwork. That as a shocking, horrible reality that people had to deal with. When we get to the Renaissance, the High Renaissance, the human body is not seen anybody as anymore as something that is decaying, but it is seen as something that is part of the cosmos, part of the beautiful creation of the divinity, and as such is ruled by mathematics and in this case anatomy, because those were attributes given to the divine mind. And mathematics was thought to explain the universe and therefore was akin to the divine mind, the divinity. When we get to Annibale, we have, between these two paintings, we have the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. The Counter-Reformation, after the Council of Trento, which is the answer of the Catholic Church to the Martin Luther and the Reformation, the Church goes back to using art as a Biblia Pauperum. That would be the Bible of the poor people, meaning the Bible of the ignorant people. During the Middle Ages, the images in the churches were supposed to educate people, and people that could not read. So you cannot read, you go to church, the priest tells you stories from the New and Old Testament, but also you see all these beautiful frescoes all over the church that tell you what happened to the various people in 2,000 years, or actually 1,500 years earlier. When we get to the Renaissance, then we have a new approach to knowledge, which is rediscovering everything, rereading everything directly. So direct experience. This direct experience ushers in the Renaissance, but then also ushers in a critical approach to everything. And this critical approach also to the Bible that is now being interpreted directly by in Germany and in the north of Europe, and eventually that brings in the Reformation. The Church after 1570, more or less, start going back to the art as again Biblia Pauperum, the Bible of the poor, meaning the dictation of the Council of Trento are specific for the artist, and artists have to depict the human body correctly, anatomically correctly, both internal and external anatomy, because they have to make scenes of martyrdom convincing. The scene of martyrdom now become the way an example that the church brings up, and the church says you have to now sacrifice yourself both physically or metaphorically for the church. And it's an inspiration. It's not a rational narrative anymore. It's not a declaration of the uncorruptible beauty of the human body, which is eternal as a concept. No, it's somebody who's sacrificing himself or herself for religion, for God, right? So in this case here, the work of Annibale Carracci evokes death, but the anatomy is correct. The anatomy, the artist was supposed to learn anatomy, both internal and external, because in some cases, some martyrs would have their intestines ripped out, and that the church said you have to depict those correctly, because that will evoke it's going to be, as you can imagine, a much more powerful image if you can see the real body inside, with the real liver, with the real kidneys, with the real heart ripped out. So it's an emotional approach to the depiction of human body that is now inspiring, evoking, but not rational anymore. This, as you can see, ushers in the Baroque period, right? Carracci, though, they were also interested in life in an Epicurean way, not in the way we intend it today, but Epicurean in a more classical way, where enjoy life with moderation, live life, whatever is given to you, enjoy it. And on the left is a very famous painting by, I think this is by Annibale, where it's called the Mangiafagioli. The Mangiafagioli, the bean eater, is inspired by the fact that during this period in Europe, in Bologna, in Italy, 1590, pretty much when this painting was done, there was a very cold winters that crippled crops, and people were starving. So just eating beans with the passion that this guy has is an incredible scene to see, because it's a simple scene, but the enjoyment of this person by eating beans is almost contagious. Like this young man on the right that drinks the last drop of wine is equally enjoyable. So the Carracci were, yes, concerned with religious themes, but unlike Caravaggio, where Caravaggio's work is really dark and nocturnal, as it has been depicted, the Carracci had, they enjoyed life. They were seeing positive and negative things in life, but overall, it was a message of optimism that even through dark times, such as Eucharisty, etc., they would say, "Okay, keep going, it's going to be okay." And so I thought that it would be an apt image to show you, right? Another example of the compassion for fellow humans of Carracci is these three drawings and one painting. You will see on the left a crippled beggar. At the center, a young man with a very serious scoliosis that is clearly had a really hard time in life. And you don't see what Carracci wrote next to him, because it's the painting of the blind woman on the right. And there is this really, really touching note that probably Carracci noted, because it was told to Carracci by this young man. And the note says, "Non so se Dio m'ama," which means, "I don't know if God loves me." On the right, instead we have the blind woman. And so these are all people that live close to Carracci, that he knew that he would see and have deep compassion for them. So you see how, in this case, the anatomy is really personal, right? Or the depiction of the human body when it's deformed, there's an attention to the detail, anatomical detail, but is not just the ideal human figure that we have seen with early Michelangelo or Leonardo, etc. It's a psychologically charged and also charged with compassion for fellow humans, right? So these are the on the right we have a self-portrait of Annibale, and on the left we have a lute player, Mascheroni. I think the name of this artist, this lute player, was Mascheroni. The Carracci surrounded themselves with intellectual friends, people that were playing music, writing, and they were really living an intellectual, deep and intellectual life, having fun together, and again trying to elevate themselves intellectually. And so I thought again this was a good image to include, because that's what we are doing here now, guys, right? And you are probably taking courses in painting, taking courses in writing, and that's what you're doing. You're surrounding yourself with beauty, with intellect, with art, to react in a positive way and powerful way to green time, right? So Passerotti was a Bolognese artist that was connected with the Carracci, and he was teaching anatomy the way that is being described by Leon Battista Alberti, meaning starting from the skeleton, then the muscle, and then the external form, and then eventually clothes. So this tradition has been revived by the Carracci after the parenthesis of mannerism. Mannerism, the body gets contorted, deformed psychologically, right? Not necessarily because of lack of knowledge of the human body, but because it is charged with emotions, it's charged with tensions, psychological tension, etc., but in a different way as the Carracci will eventually do, which maintain the anatomical integrity of the human figure, and yet still convey great pathos, right? So this is example at the period, the lesson of anatomy in Bologna. Bologna, as you might know, was the site where anatomy was restarted in academic context in the 1370s. And from there, it leaked to the rest of Italy and ushered the Renaissance. So now this is from my book, right? My second book. In my first book, is organized pretty much as systematic text on anatomy, where I discuss the aspect, the stereometric, anatomical, topographic anatomy and of the body. If you want, it can be reconduced to the method of the early Renaissance, where first we want to know where is what and who's who in anatomy, right? We see the parts, we understand the body, we understand the figure. But then in the second book, my approach is closer to Michelangelo interest, that was more about giving life to the body. So once we know how to navigate the structural and topographic or systematic anatomy, then we need to practice moving it, giving it life, pretty much like Michelangelo did, right? But also the Carracci and all the Baroque did, right? The Baroque period clearly uses the body as a stage, as a vehicle to convey incredibly powerful theatrical narrative, right? So I start with for this presentation with these three images, because they are kind of emblematic of this chapter. And the chapter is about landmarks, right? Why landmarks? Because landmarks give us access to the human figure, to various aspects of the human figure. And landmarks are the alphabet. They are the permit us to read things that are not visible. So when we look at a figure from the outside, like the image from the right, we see bumps, we see volume, we see wrinkles and depression, etc. But if we start studying the body from the inside, then we kind of, first with the skeleton, for example, you see on the left, and then the superficial muscle, then we have a much more informed understanding of the human figure from the inside. And suddenly that bump is not a bump anymore, is a muscle, is a bone, is a tendon, is something. So now suddenly we can bring together these three different views: the structural, superficial anatomy, and external anatomy, bring them together and add more to the artistic interpretation or to our artwork, right? So, for example, I did a pretty systematic work on this this chapter, and I've used also different level of visualization. So the arm on the right, you see, has an upper left, sorry, is reduced to basic volume. This basic volume can be further subdivided into more specific volume until we get to the organic form. The two images, actually three little drawing on the right, you can, I tried to compare external form and internal form, and give access to the readers to the structure that is synthesized with this little skeletal diagram on the upper portion of this image. And again, in order to achieve a much more informed understanding of the human form. My basic concept is do not imitate. The imitation is passive. Conceptualization is an active approach to art. So when we copy a figure, if we understand what these forms are, we can have a much more active approach to drawing or painting, because there is the possibility of interpretation or understanding, like in this case, understanding movement. Once I understand the structure, I can better understand movement, for example, right? In this case in here, this is still very almost topographic anatomy, but we see how on the left, we have images that show in blue the landmarks. Those that are in little dot and continuous lines are the visible landmark from the outside. Those that are with the little parallel lines are not necessarily visible. They are hidden, but they are important landmarks too. Why these landmarks? Because with these landmarks, we can have access to the whole skeletal apparatus. And having access to the skeletal apparatus is what gives the human figure harmony. We can see on the two images on the right how we can also line up some soft and skeletal landmark to visualize patterns. This pattern can be measured, right? Measured more easily. When we tackle the organic form, one of the big problems of trying to interpret the human form is that we have ideas, right? We have assumptions on how the body should be. So many times I see some of my students drawing the body maybe more taller or bigger or muscle much more inflated than they really are, because we tend to make assumptions. And so we don't see what we have in front, but we see what we depict, what we think that part of the body should be like, without really realizing that. Having access to landmarks, like in this case, the soft and skeletal landmarks, permit us to be more objective in measuring, increasing the precision of our work, right? So this is another example how to connect this for me here, we start from the skeleton, then we read the muscle, and then we get into the sternal form, and the next would be the muscular flows. So I did I think a systematic work on these muscular flows that, as you can see, can be read aesthetically, right? So how these lines, how this overlapping of this form come together has an aesthetic. There is an aesthetic aspect to this, right? I can show you maybe a quick demo later on about this, right? But this is what I call the muscular flows, right? Or muscular pathways that can run throughout the human figure, right? This is another one of my mottos is we see what we know. The more we know, the more we see, and the more we draw. So we might all be acquainted with the saying, which I think goes back to the Impressionists, right? I paint what I see. That is well and good, right? It's true. We paint what we see, but what we see is going to be, limited if we don't have an understanding of the subject. An example I like to make for my student is imagine that I'm called now. Somebody called me to judge a dog show. And I say, look, I don't know anything about dogs, right? The parameter of beauty, etc. And this friend of mine said, it doesn't matter, right? We'd like you to be there. I'm flattered, and of course I go, right? I go, and they put in front of me these nice mutts, right? These nice puppies. And I pick one, and I say, oh, that's cute, right? That's cute puppy, got all fluffy, and that's it. That's the winner, right? And all the judges now look at me like I'm an idiot, saying, no, that's the ugliest dog. Look, it's cute, right? It's a cute doggy. It's got the ribbon. And then they explain me why the doggy is not cute, because it doesn't have certain parameters that I was not privy with before. So now suddenly, once I understand what the parameters of beauty or soundness of that puppy are supposed to be, now I see the dog as ugly. Maybe it's still cute, right? But then I think, oh, cute, but poor puppy, right? It's got a strange nose, right? And the same thing with the human body. If I see, for example, if you look at the knee on the right, I may see all these bumps. And I see, for example, see this bump in here, right? And I don't know what that is. And when I copy a bump in there, but I might be putting this bump a little bit high or a little bit lower or a little bit to the back. And suddenly, even if I don't know anatomy, the knee looks like it's broken or it's hit, a bee sting or dislocated or something, because the bumps are not in the right place, right? We all had this experience struggling with the bumpiness of the knee, right? One of the most difficult parts of the human body to draw. Maybe second and third only to hands and face, right? But so now if I look at this and I'm thinking, okay, let me check inside and I see this, right? That's the femur, right? That's the femur. So I see now the bump, that's the condyle of the femur, that's the epicondyle of the femur. And now I see suddenly this sharp line here, I know that is the articular face of the femur. And I see this slight shadow here, that is now the articular plane. And I see now a bump in here, and that's the head of the fibula. And I see this line in here, I know that's the tendon of the bicep. When I see this line, it goes up like this, because it goes directed toward the knee, I know that this is now the lower margin of the vastus lateralis. When I see this line here going toward the tuberosity of the tibia, that would be the iliotibial tract. So now suddenly all these lines in here are coming together harmoniously because I know what they are and I know where I'm supposed to go. Here. So another example is this of how to use the landmarks, right? I have a model, she's sitting down, and I only see a few little points. One point would be, for example, this little dot in here, right? That little dot in there is the acromioclavicular joint and connects the spine of the scapula with the clavicle, and therefore I know that the trapezius ends in here and the acromion goes down like this here, flat, like that, right? So now I see this line here, I know that's a line of the scapula, and if this is the line of the scapula, I keep going until I find this line here, which is the vertebral margin of the scapula. So now I have access to the scapula. The head of the humerus, of course, is easy to find because it's pretty much under, is pretty much under the acromion, and where the rib cage, the profile of rib cage changes direction from this to this, I know that more or less here I'm at the end of the rib cage. So now I have access to the rib cage too, because the bump that I see here is the semicervical. As you know, the semicervical is the end of the neck and the beginning of the rib cage. So I see that little rhomboid shape in here, semicervical. Rib cage starts in here and ends up in here. So now I have access to the rib cage. I see the iliac crest and the little dimples, and I see the posterior superior iliac spine. And now I can recreate the skeleton. Now the question is that, are you really going to draw that every time you had to do figure drawing? No, this is not for necessarily for, you could, but this method is not necessarily for use in figure drawing, is for learning to read the human body. Once you learn to read the human body, you don't need to draw this anymore. You can see more though. If you go through this, you see more. Now you know which puppy is the puppy that is going to win, because you have a critical approach to your subject, right? The same thing for everything else. In this case in here, the whole body is gradually explored. So I see iliac crest, right? And then at the end of the iliac crest, when the iliac crest stopped in here, because then it goes into the inguinal ligament here, I know that's the anterior superior iliac spine. Pubic bone just above the genitals. In women, the bottom of the pelvis is pretty much at the same level as the end of the genitals like this. So now I have top and bottom, and I have containing here, I have the pelvis, right? The pelvis in here like this. So if I have the pelvis in here, I can see that pretty much at the level, and this is the way it is, right? At the level of the pubic bone, I have the great trochanter, this egg-shaped forming here that is at the center of the three muscles. So gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, and tensor fascia lata. So this muscle in here converging down like this. At the center of this trio of muscle, I have first a depression and then slightly under the skin, an egg-shaped form. That's the great trochanter, hence the beginning of the femur. If I go down here now, I see this line here, right? This line here is the bicep, the tendon of the bicep. If I see that, I know that where the tuberosity of the tibia, sorry, the head of the fibula is, and just above that, I have the joint. So I know my femur ends up here, behind the patella. I can reconstruct the whole skeleton. Same thing in here, in more daring poses, like slightly more dynamic poses, I can still find dot, 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 and then reconstruct the whole skeleton. Notice one thing, that in this diagram here, I divided the pelvis in 3 segments, whereas in this is divided in 4 segments. Both ways are acceptable. It's just convention. This is not really used in medicine and in surgery or orthopedic ward. It's just for artists. So this is a good approximation, where you have upper third, the iliac spine, lower third here, the pubic bone, and then bottom of the pelvis and top of the pelvis here. In here, instead, you have upper quarter, iliac spine, lower quarter, pubic bone, and then the great trochanter. Either way, it works. It's a good approximation for us to have access to the structure, right? To the solid structure of the skeleton. So here, and this is, I think, in the last slide, I show now the whole figure, the whole body, visualized in different ways, conceptualized in different ways. Stereometric, right? Stereometry Stereometry, as you might know, is a study of, so stereometry is a science that studies the volumes, right? And during the Renaissance, this science is directed toward the human body, so that the human body is reduced to volumes, essential volume, because they are measurable, more easily measurable. So once you reduce the human body to a box instead of a complex rib cage, you can measure that easily, you can sketch it quickly, maintain the proportional relationship between the parts, and then, if you want, put it in perspective, right? But also imagine poses, right? It's easy to imagine a figure in a foreshortened angle like this. If you reduce it to basic volumes, it's much more difficult to draw it in a foreshortened way, because we tend to resort, when we do this, more on imitation. And imitation, again, as I said before, is susceptible to assumptions, your brain's assumptions. So using a method that permits you to be objective eventually permits you to have much more access to a more realistic rendering of the figure. So here we have now the stereometric, right? The structural, the skeletal. We have external forms in here, and then we have the superficial anatomy. So in other chapters of the book, I discuss movement more movement in detail, facial expressions, movement of the hands, techniques, etc. And but the chapter on landmarks that I have discussed in here is, I think, indispensable to then have access to the movement of the body. So just in conclusion, going back to Michelangelo approach and Leonardo's approach and Dürer approach, right? Leonardo's approach was systematic. It was almost actually was scientific, but always directed toward aesthetic, meaning he would first dissect the human body scientifically, especially when he was working with a friend anatomist, Marco Antonio della Torre, that he eventually died of the plague. But eventually he takes the forms of the body, and then after having them dissected, he puts them back together in his artwork, adding aesthetics, right? So that's our work as artists. That we take anatomy, we study it, but we have to study in function of aesthetics. If not, it's like meat on the slab, and that's not what artists do. So when I study anatomy for medical purposes at the University of Bologna, it was the different anatomy. It was different. It was where things are, what they do, how do I access that organ, etc. It was different, right? The aesthetic component was not there at all. When I studied anatomy, I restarted my study anatomy aesthetically at the New York Academy of Art. It was directed toward aesthetics, and that's how it should be. As artists, you want to, yes, no, understand the name, even if they're Latin names, so be it, right? Bite the bullet and learn them. But naming, the names are there for a reason. It's important to memorize a name, also because the name they tell you a lot of things about the subject, right? But once you have learned the parts, we have to take the parts out for a spin. It has the car, the body has to become a vehicle. Has to become a vehicle that conveys messages, conveys aesthetics. If the body that you depict doesn't do that, then it doesn't do the job. Makes sense? So the body has to now express something. For Leonardo, it was expressing beautiful harmony. Leonardo was for balanced harmonies, was the beauty, the essential beauty of the body at rest and in movement, but never in, except for a few cases like the Battaglia di Anghiari, etc., never strained beyond recognition. For Dürer did not, that I know of, did not do dissection, but he did a very important job, which was to conceptualize in an absolute way, systematically, the segment of the body. You all know the boxes, right? Dürer did not come up with a concept. That concept is still from Italian Renaissance, but it was not systematized as Dürer did it. Dürer systematized the human body, but the problem is that the work with Dürer is on one hand incredibly important. On the other hand, it purges completely the organic aspect of the human body. So we can take the work of Dürer and use it because it's very important. But when it comes to depicting the human figure, then we have to add the organic component. Why were these guys, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Polaiolo, Carracci, etc., so effective in painting the human figure? Because they dissected, because they were putting the hand in the cadaver. They had an intimate, deep knowledge of the physicality, the physical aspect of the human body. That stays with you. When we start purging that, then the body becomes more conceptualized and maybe acquires certain aesthetic aspect, but maybe loses our aspect. We want to be aware of this, right? Whether you do a body that is, for example, the Mannerists did not really study much anatomy because they thought it was not important. Carracci instead, they recover, let's say, they rekindle the interest in the study of the anatomy because they realize, especially in the moment of counter-reformation, as I said before, when the body becomes now a vehicle that acts as an emotional tool, let's say, to evoke martyrdom, to evoke passion, to evoke something that is emotional, right? Not rational. The opposite of the approach of the human body of the early Renaissance. Then you need to know the human figure well because it has to tell a story. Again, when we study the human body, we want to study it from many points of view. The more point of view we study it, the better it is. But what we need to do is become able to read the body. When we look at the form, we know what that form is. We want to be able to know where the muscle starts from, where it ends, and what muscle is next to it, etc., because that will charge your work with empathy, if you want, with understanding of the physicality of the human figure, and then, of course, directed toward aesthetic purposes, not healing purposes, as if you were a physician, right? So, if you don't mind, I would like to take questions, guys. If you have any questions, I would love to hear from you, and maybe we spend. Actually, let me try to do this. Let me try to. No, let's take questions. If you have questions, guys.
Hey, Roberto, I am monitoring the chat box, and it seems to me as though everybody is just speechless as to what you've been presenting, and they are completely engaged and fascinated. I've got a string of private messages of just outright praise of what you are doing, and it seems like you could go in many different directions. It's really up to you. There's so many things that could be said, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me try then. If I can, and you know, as you guys can ask question and I can answer as I draw, right? So let's do this. Let's do both. Right? That's multitask, right? Chew gum and pedal a bicycle. So yeah. Let's see.
In fact, I'll weigh in and then I'll mute myself again. Apologies for that. But I think what we would prefer, just for the sake of our editing component here at Studio Incamminati, is if you chat your questions, then I could shoot them right out at Roberto as he's drawing. Is that okay, everybody?
Yeah.
All right. Great. Well, let me know.
So I'm going to try to share it. Hopefully we can do the sharing, because if there are many people connected, I don't know if the thing will work. But let's see, right? Let's try. Like, see if I can get a little bit of an image here, right?
Okay, I'm just going to leave myself unmuted as you do your thing, and I will weigh in on some of the observations. So I've got a question about when someone does not have access to things like skeletons or courses in human anatomy, how do we develop the deep knowledge that you are referring to?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, certainly. The individual in question, which has already expired in my Zoom chat box here, Amy, I believe, when we do not have access to things like skeletons or courses in human anatomy, how do we develop the deep knowledge that you are referring to, please?
Yeah, that's a trick. That's difficult. It's a very good question. So the problem is this. The problem is that these guys, they had access to body, right? We don't. But we also have access to meaning we could go to see a dissection and learn from it. But we're not going to have access to hundreds of body like Michelangelo did or like Leonardo did, right? So so what we could do, though, we could go to dissection when the institution we are connected with offers them, and that is always a very powerful situation, right? Because it stays with you. After that, meaning you become aware of the physicality, vulnerability, and if you want, even amazing complexity of the human figure, right? But then we have also, unlike these artists, we also have access to a lot of text of anatomy, text of apps, etc. Apps are not really my favorite, in the sense that apps tend to be plasticky, right? But we have apps, we have books, we have many images that can really help us greatly. So one thing you could do is study anatomy from different point of view, with different structure, different books, different texts, and you will start to have an idea of the complexity of the human figure. So just to show you an example from the book, right, from my book in here. Let me reduce this because the this Zoom is a little bit slow now, right? So let me see if I can. So I opened the chapter here of the book here with well, first with a great introduction by Dan Thompson, right?
Thank you, sir.
By Dan Thompson, right? Just to forward by Dan Thompson, so that you guys know, right? And then so in here we have this image in here, which I chose because I find it very emblematic of the level of instruction that artists went through. This is an academy in I think it's in Rome, 1570s, right? And these are artists, and you can see here this young student in here. See how young they are. They are studying. This is a real cadaver, and there's a real skeleton. So as they were studying, the teacher, that would be me, would get a cadaver and inflate it in classroom in front of students, and they would just go and look. Now we don't do that anymore for various reasons, ethical first of all, right? Also because most time these guys were not really kind of finicky and about how to get the body. I just go at night, dig up a body, and then or people that were condemned to death. But the level of knowledge and that they had was so direct, and because it was everyday experience. We don't have that, but we do have access to a lot of textbooks, a lot of images, if you want. Even, for example, bodyworks, right? Bodyworks I'm ethically opposed to that because it's kind of sketchy. But this being said, it's an interesting tool, a very important tool. If you want to go the bodywork exhibit and then maybe work from that, copy from that, that is not really perfect anatomy, because sometimes the muscle are put back together in a strange way, meaning have too much gap, too much space in between them, etc. But it can give you an idea of the volumes of the three-dimensionality of the inside of the human body. So between books, apps, and exhibits like bodywork, you can achieve a good understanding of anatomy. I hope this answers the question.
That's great, Roberto. And by the way, some of the not the art schools, but the medical schools are doing plastinated specimens these days. So you don't necessarily have to go to Body Worlds or Bodies, which was at the Southeast.
That's just true. And if you guys know the Museo della Specola in Florence, it has incredible anatomical wax. Now we don't have those, but you can also get images online of the Museo della Specola. Actually, let me write it down, right? So you can Museo della Specola. And this is a fantastic in Florence, Firenze. This is a fantastic museum that started in probably 1600, and they are anatomical waxes, pretty much life-size, incredibly realistic. And these waxes were made for medical students so that they could study anatomy during the non-dissection months, meaning the dissection months where students would had access to cadavers were the winter months, because there was no refrigeration. So you would not open a cadaver in August, because then you don't stay in the room anymore, right? It's really awful smell, right? So
Absolutely.
then it would decay quickly, etc. Right? So they would they did this incredible number of cere anatomiche, right? Anatomical waxes, and they are incredible. They're incredible. So you could also study these from photograph, or if you're lucky, you can go to Florence, right? Go to Florence and then check the museum, and then look at these. They are incredibly well done. So today we had to gather the anatomical knowledge from different sources, but it's difficult to have. I mean, we do it, no? Then we do it at the Academy and in PAFA and in Incamminati and the New York Academy of Art. Periodically, we do that.
Yes.
But it wouldn't be the almost daily experience that this guy had. So, but they didn't have the apps, right?
Well, we have. I started a program with Jefferson University here in Philadelphia. So we're going to the laboratory to look at specimens, to look at prosections, to look at dissections that have been cleaned, and so that's been an extraordinary window into the creative process and the aesthetic interpretation of the mechanistic anatomy that we all love so much, that we harken back to with Bridgman. And it's been just a joy. And, we continue to see people go in that direction. So it's this thing that you're stoking. It's an artistic instinct, I have to tell you. So let me ask you another question. Someone asks, do you cover eyes, hands, and feet in great detail in your new book?
I cover hands, yes, in great detail. Let me see. Let me show you a few images.
And while you're doing that, I'll hit you with another question, because I know you don't have a ton of time.
Where
do you start your classes on drawing the anatomy? What do you start with?
I'm sorry. What did I study or?
No. As you're looking for hands and I'm kind of hitting you with multiple questions. I realize that. I apologize, but I know you don't have tons of time.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, while you're looking at eyes, hands, and feet, someone also asks, where do you start your class? What do you start with when you start?
Oh, I start with the exoskeleton.
Okay.
So I like to start with the exoskeleton because I find I want to privilege the dominant volume, right? And then basically, this is what I'm doing now. The exoskeleton, we're blocking the volume of head, right? Rib cage and pelvis, right? And as I block this in like this, right? Block this in like this, I privilege this as a volume, right? As a volume, meaning I don't want to block this as line because I want to privilege the form. So line is 2D, form is 3D, right? As you know. So what I do is when I block this form here, I want to pay attention to two things. I want to pay attention to the proportional relationship. Right? And then volumes. So how proportionality, how is one volume relating proportionally to another volume, right? Actually, let me draw it a little bit bigger, right? So I'm blocking, for example, the head, and I just don't care much about the detail. I just pay attention to angle, right? Width and height, and that's it. Because what I need to do, imagine now, this is a method is also called sculptural method. The Florentine structural method is also called a sculptural or architectural method, right? Because it sees the body as a building, right, or a solid like a sculpture. So the when I block the scene, I just think of 1, 2, 3, for example, right? Paying attention now to how these forms come together very quickly, very loosely, because if I break it down in detail too soon, I lose the harmony. I lose the harmony of the form. So I do this, and then I say, okay, I look at my model, and I can check, for example, how are the proportional relationship between these parts in here, right? So I say, okay, the head fits in the exoskeleton 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be 3 1/4, whatever that is. You look at the model. But now I have proportional relationship. Make sense? As I do this, now maybe I can add, let's say, a leg here, like this, right? And maybe this leg goes the other way. I just make it up. Right? I don't know, right? And then I see that maybe here I have, I don't know, an arm. So now that I block in the whole figure, right? Blocking the whole figure, checking out also if the 2 halves, for example, are in the right proportion relationship, right? Because that is the key, is the proportional relationship, right? The harmony between the parts, right? But I block this in quickly, very quickly, like this, right? Maybe this comes out like that. I don't know if it's even possible, right? But the guy's doing it, so it's possible. Then if I have this, now I created scaffolding, right? A scaffolding, and or imagine a puppet, imagine a wire sculpture, right? A wire sculpture that I can now move and bend. That's the same thing. Visualize the idea, visualize the proportional relationship and the volumes. And if the proportional relationship are correct, I see how they are kind of strung together, like beads on the beads of a necklace, right? If this is okay, then what I do, I can now attach to it the arms, meaning first the exoskeleton, then the appendicular starting with the legs, because the legs give me contact with the ground. They determine the pose. So once I block this in, for example, I want to see, okay, this is the exoskeleton. What is this heel, right? And I drop a line down and see how or bring the line up from the model here, and I see that the heel in this case is at the armpit. So now I know exactly how this point here and this point here are connected in terms of pose, right? So if I draw too quickly, too soon detail, we tend to get lost in that. Also because if I spend time on a detailing here, right, and then as you draw this and this and this, I realize that rib cage should be tilted a little bit more. I wasted time doing that, and now I had to do it again. This way, if I pay attention only to this aspect of the pose, which is the structural and the proportional relationship, I can keep changing if I need to, right? So after that, I block in the arms, because the arms, so imagine this, if the rib cage moves, right? If the rib cage moves, the other part of the body had to quickly adapt to it because they had to sustain the rib cage, right? If the leg moves, the rib cage might move or not, but the legs the legs are sustaining the rib cage. If the arm moves, who cares, right? I mean, you could be perfectly straight and have one arm up and one arm down, and the rib cage doesn't feel the difference. So the rib cage is what I call the dominant volume, because it's the most important, right? And in terms of it determines the other the position of the other limbs, right? So let's say now that I have this arm in here, right? This arm in here. When I block the same, now I want to see how, for example, the elbow. What is the elbow in relation to existing lemma? Once I establish this, 1, 2, 3, this becomes now the point of reference for the rest. Meaning, when I block in the heel, I want to see where is the heel in relation to what is there already. Where is the elbow in relation to what is there already? Makes sense? So now with the elbow here, the wrist in here is higher than the head. This is the level of the mouth, more or less. Let's see, I have now another limb in here, right? Like this. I want to see where is the elbow. And I say, okay, that's the navel. It's a little bit above the umbilicus, right? More or less. Where is now the forearm right here? And I say, oh, look, if these are the genitals here, it's the wrist is kind of the level of the pubic bone, and so on. Makes sense. So now I have, and then maybe the hand is here, right? This end here is kind of doing a kind of strange movement, but now if this works, right? This works, then I can use this as a scaffolding to block in more details, right? Block in more detail, whether you erase it or not. And from here, now I'm thinking, okay, in here I have now, I can invest now time on this work in here, because I know that the overall structure, right, of this is sound. The proportions are right. Now I can invest time doing whatever I need to do, right? First, maybe a line drawing, blocking in the muscle, blocking in the form like this of the organic form of the muscle, right? Or also the tonal rendering, right? Quickly, the tonal rendering. Let's say I have now a shadow light coming from here. I can block in more or less, right, with certain precision, right? It doesn't have to be super precise. The tonal aspect of this quickly, and quickly visualize the pattern light mass and shadow mass, and finish now in detail. I can spend all the time I want now to add more detail, the organic detail, paying more and more attention now to the model. But in the beginning, I impose my reading on the model because I am synthesizing it. And this is the Florentine structural method. The French tonal approach is different, right? But this is based on anatomy and comes out of the Renaissance and Baroque, etc. So does it answer the question about how do I approach it?
It looks great to me.
That was the question, right? Was a question?
Yeah, there's a lot of information in that. I'd like to hit you with something else, if I may. We had a really interesting question from Jonathan about prioritizing information. He is looking at what you put together on the knee and how much priority you placed in the bone structure and then in the musculature on top of the bone structure and so on and so forth. So he's asking for any recommendations you may have for deciphering the region of the neck and clavicle, please.
So yeah, I mean that's let me show you. This is how I decoded that, right? Because the neck is very delicate, beautiful, but it can be also very ugly if you don't read it properly, right? So in the first book, I tackled that aesthetic aspect of head and neck, right? By doing this. First looking at it in depth, right? In depth, with the muscular structure, etc., kind of gradually building up from skeleton to the superficial muscle. But then after that, once we study this, as I said before, we need to direct this toward aesthetics, and this is what I did, right? So if you look at this, we say, okay, I know the name, etc., but what do I really care is, for example, the patterns. In this case in here, the pattern of movement. So in this case in here, we see that the sternocleidomastoid, right, the fusiform portion and the flat portion, the sternocleidomastoid, go here and then the scaling group goes this way and the trapezius goes that way. That creates a beautiful kind of pattern of radiating muscles wrapping around the neck. So, or for example, when we turn ahead, right, we see how the sternocleidomastoid from a position angle back like this, right? As you turn the head, the sternocleidomastoid verticalizes and now is looking straight up like this. Or in certain position, when you turn the head the other way, we see this muscle in here now wrapping around the neck like that. Or in here, the muscle we have here, sternocleidomastoid, trapezius, scalene, splenius, caput, and cervix, go kind of up and down like line like that. This depends also on the subject, right? This depends on the subject. But the idea is this: we cannot really once we study the essential aesthetic aspects of the body, which we decide the aesthetic of the body. We decide what the aesthetic is something that we attach to things, right? But then we cannot codify this, right? We cannot codify this. There's too many. But then we can start looking for them as they happen, as they visualize themselves depending on the position. So now, if you start paying attention to the patterns that you see in the body, how these forms wrap around like that, what you're going to do is you connect them together, because these are all acting together as a group. So you cannot just draw an isolated line here and then completely disregard that line when you draw the next one. They have to be seen as a group. They work together. If you know anatomy, if you know origin insertion, for example, you can start seeing these collaboration between muscle that create patterns of movement. So, meaning the moment you know that you have to start looking for them, you look for them. Your analysis will become more and more sharp and acute and correct as your knowledge of anatomy will increase. So in a sense, your aesthetic aesthetic appreciation will increase as you understand anatomy, right? Does it answer the question?
It's a great creative, I think, answer, which reinforces much of what you're getting across in the book. And I want to segue to another question, if you have time.
Yeah.
David's iPad wants to know if you intend to offer classes around or centered upon the new book. Are you going to do any of that?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm already offering some, and I'll. In fact, it's something that I want to keep developing. Right, want to keep developing because. The topic is so basically so infinite, right? There's so much. So yes, I definitely will organize specific courses in collaboration with the institution, Incamminati, and other schools. And yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. One more thing I want to show you, right? For example, when we block in, speaking of these pathways of aesthetic pathways, if you want, if I block it in this figure in here like this, as we've seen first, I block in the volume, right? And then the volume is a structural aspect. The structural aspect has no aesthetic implication whatsoever. Meaning it might look cool, might look good, but that's not my intention, but not my interest, right? My interest, my goal is to find the proportional relationship that creates harmonies, right? They create harmony between the parts, right? When I have now blocked in a little bit more detail in here, I start thinking, okay, let's see now these pathways that I mentioned earlier on when I showed that sequence between skeleton, arm, pathways, right? So let's see, there is here the sternocleidomastoid, right? So sternocleidomastoid, think of this, that sternal, right? Sternal, clavicle, and mastoid process. It goes to the mastoid process. So the name of the muscle tells you origin and insertion. That's why, learning the anatomy and learning the names, right, is important because it helps you in better understand the form, right? So we have here, look how, let's look in the flows, aesthetic flows in the form, right? With the heading here creates kind of a nice little curve that flows into the sternocleidomastoid, it flows into the sternum, it flows into the linea alba, it flows down to the pubic bone and then to the adductors, right? And then maybe it comes out from the other side on tibialis, like that. So we have this beautiful connection between the parts, right? That is purely aesthetic. It's not anatomical anymore. I mean, anatomy creates it, but the way we read it, a doctor will look at this and what is that, right? But we say, oh, cool. We like that, right? So here we have another, which I think is beautiful example of aestheticization, if it's a word, aesthetizing the body, attaching aesthetic construct to the human body, is the Cupid's bow, right? The Cupid's bow is created by the sartorius. They start from the anterior superior spine and goes diagonally down the thigh, dividing the group of the quadricep, right, from the group of the adductors here like this. And then it moves down to below the knee here to the goose foot here. And from here, it goes down to the shin, right? So now you have here a line that goes down like this, down like this, along the thigh, creating another pathway, right? Another pathway of aesthetic pathway, if you want. So why is this important? Because if I copy the human body without paying attention to these harmonies, I might draw a correct, very correct human body, but it might be a little bit soulless, a little bit matter of fact, a little bit specimen. Makes sense? If I understand there are these pathways or these flows, for example, there would be another flow in here, connection between the rib cage here, right, and the rib cage here, right? Typically, there is some sort of darkening here because of the shadow, and here a slightly darker volume here, and then picks up again because this is the abs, right? So the abs create their own volume here, right? So then there is some sort of connection between one side and the other side of the human body, and that's something that kind of connected two parts like that, right? Create some sort of flow connection between the two that can be echoed by, for example, by this, right? The external oblique connecting with the iliac crest and linguinal ligament and the genitals, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So are these important from the point of view of anatomy as if I were a doctor? No. If I were an artist, yes, because they capture an essence of movement, of aesthetic that is unique to the human beauty when the body's movement. Again, I could copy it exactly as is without knowing this, but I might miss something. Make sense?
That makes total sense to me. It looks to me, and I'm trying to kind of recast a question I got from Janice, which is an excellent question. It looks to me like you enter into kind of a visual conversation with the body relying upon the fact, the science of the anatomy, and it's the aesthetics that provides the passion and provides the discovery and the enthusiasm to persevere.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the aesthetic, is what is aesthetic, right? Aesthetic is many things, but aesthetic is cultural construct, but is also is born out of biology, meaning what we see beautiful is very often has a biological origin, right? So, for example, if we see a beautiful body that moves beautifully, moves well, we know that body is healthy, and it's my genes are going to be safe with that person if I want to mate. So we see certain types of body, certain movements, certain proportion as beautiful, probably because we read the genetic in it. And I'm trying to keep this as, because now it's a difficult topic to tackle, this sort of genetics and genes, etc. But that's human. That's who we are. That's why I'm. To complicate the whole situation, though, there is culture, and culture then always clash or interacts with genetics. So what is beautiful can be a mix of culture and genetics, our evolution that still has an opinion about what is beautiful and what is not, right? So yes, it's but at the end, I see this as incredibly complex, and hence the beauty of this, because it's incredibly complex, meaning it's infinite. You can have access to so many possible interpretation, to so many possible interpretation of beauty. If you look at it from this cultural and biological point of view, and the way you mix them or you read them is going to be your aesthetic opinion, right? If you want.
What a fantastic place to leave the conversation, Roberto, starting with the artistic and going into the anatomical science of it all and the structure, and then ending with the endless kind of imaginative mindset and the beauty of the artistry. So wonderful. I know that you are a person in very high demand, and you're closing on another big commitment because they're banging down your door to get you to do something in the very near future. So I want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing some of your wisdom and part of your day with us. And I encourage everybody, in fact, urge everybody to go out and pick up Roberto's new book, because I've looked at it and I've read through it, and I think it's very interesting and very, very necessary for our practice and our appreciation of what we do, which is, just as Roberto has just said, so complex and nuanced.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you, guys, for showing up, so many, and for this very interesting question. It makes me really happy to see that so many people are interested in anatomy, and you have so many just to the point question that tells me that you are very interested in the topic. You understand the importance of anatomy and how it can help you to develop your art, to become more creative. Whether you end up using anatomy or not, this can be also a method of approaching art, approaching aesthetics, and looking at the world, right? Well, thank you.
Well, again, thank you all so much, and we hope to see you in the near future at a future event or opening or demonstration or anything. Just keep in touch with us, and again, thank you so much, Roberto.